Yeah, kia ora, James. Thanks so much for agreeing to be on the podcast with us today.
No problem, great to be here.
Really excited for this conversation. So we're going to start the interview today with the same question we started every interview with, which is, what's your political ideology or philosophy that you identify with?
So I've kind of thought about this a little bit over the years, and there's a term floating around called principled pragmatism, which is this idea that you can hold really deep-seated philosophical values, but then when you get out into the real world and you come across people who equally hold deep-seated philosophical values, maybe different ones are on the other end of the spectrum, you've got to reach some sort of compromise. So I think that if you talk to me on a left-right spectrum or a sort of a libertarian, authoritarian spectrum, I'd sit more on the socially liberal, economically liberal side of things. So if you've done this political compass test, I'm kind of sort of down towards the bottom right corner of that. So very much against big state, big governments. I think the best way we can get the best results for people, individuals and families, is for you to make as many decisions about yourself and your life and your family as possible, and that we should encourage families and communities to wrap around and support, and then underlying all that is the safety net of the state, so having good quality public education, healthcare, social welfare systems to help people when they do fall down to get back on their feet. So that's generally how I'd describe it.
So James Shaw is also known for his pragmatism and his exit interview yesterday. Do you feel like that's something you share with him, even though he's on the other side of the political spectrum?
Yeah, I'd hope so. I'd hope that when it comes time for me to hang up my boots in my career, that I can look back and have left the kind of legacy that he left. Because, I mean, he was instrumental in what's known as the Zero Carbon Act. And he got that through because he was willing to work with all sides of the political spectrum. So I remember actually being in a room with him when I was working here. It was he, and it was Jacinda Ardern and Todd Muller and Simon Bridges. And he made sure that he worked very closely with us and with the government on getting that legislation across. And because he understood that if you want significant long-lasting change, you can't be dogmatic and rigid about this. You have to actually meet in the middle somewhere. So yeah, I think we share those values, and if I'm half as successful as he is, that'd be great.
So you say you're in the bottom right corner of that vote compass political matrix. While you're there though, do you think the best place for New Zealand is there, where you are, or actually in the centre where, you know, if the population's an even spread around the compass, we reconcile in the middle?
Well, I think if you fundamentally believe that your values are what will end up being the best for the country, you'd probably want the country to move more towards that direction. But I could be wrong about my philosophical ideas and values, and no doubt I probably am, and certainly am wrong about most of them, because no one's right. How do you judge whether someone's particular value on euthanasia or on the role of the state in, taxation is right or wrong? You've kind of got to get to that point where you're making hard decisions about moral issues, and reasonable people can disagree on both sides. At the end of the day, you let the numbers count. So I would ideally like to, eventually shift the country more towards a limited government, more personal responsibility type of environment. But I recognise that not everyone shares those values, and it might be okay that if we all meet somewhere in the middle, as long as the outcomes that we're getting are good outcomes, and as long as the way we're getting to them respects people's rights and choice and freedoms and things like that.
John Key's reason for being in government was that he was ambitious for New Zealand, and Jacinda Ardern's was child poverty. What's your reason for being in government?
Well, I'm going to be cheeky and I'm going to steal bits of both of them. So I'm going to say the reason I am in politics and want to be in government is because I'm ambitious for children. And it comes from, I think, partly from my background. So I grew up in the south end of Timaru, so single mum household with my brother and sister. Went to good state public school. But I think the only reason that I am where I am today and why I've had some career success is because the value that mum put on education and us going to school every single day. And I kind of realised that not everyone gets that opportunity. I think we as a government and as a state and a community can do better about providing those opportunities. But it's the sort of the fact of life that not everyone also grows up in a family or an environment or with parents who value those kind of value education. So I'd like to see that opportunity be available for every child in the country, and so that's what drives me to get into politics.
How do you think that you're going to make that opportunity available? So you get a family, and I guess from the area where I grew up in, we have families who didn't appreciate the value of education, potentially because their families had a hard time in their own education system. How do you think we sort of create that importance around education for everybody in this country.
Yeah, and I think you've made a good point. We are all products of our upbringing as well. So a lot of the decisions we make in life are based on the tools that we've had growing up and what we've been taught. And so I think it's really, when it comes to the responsibility of the state and the government, from my philosophical perspective, it's the government's responsibility to put the framework in place to allow people to make good decisions for themselves. And so for me, that means that, yep, it might be a little bit more intervention early in life to make sure that many more children have an equal opportunity. So that's that social investment model. And so when you think about it, if all you cared about were dollars and cents and taxes and government finances, it would still make sense to invest more early on in a child's life, because you're actually saving the taxpayer a lot more down the end of the road, whether that's in drug and alcohol dependency or exposure to the criminal justice system or lower education outcomes. All those things have an impact on the government books. But more importantly for that, it has an impact on people's well-being. So if you can improve and invest early in people's well-being, then you're going to get that natural flow-on effect of sort of learning by osmosis or leading by example and teaching your children values around education and around what it means to be part of a community. And then you've also got stuff at the other end, which is that some people have had a tough life and some people have made some bad decisions. And there need to be consequences for bad decisions. And we need to make sure that as much as possible we rehabilitate and reintegrate criminals and wrongdoers back into society, that we provide people who may be struggling with substance abuse the opportunity for rehabilitation and for treatment to make sure that they can contribute to society too. So it's about treating it on both ends. And I think that's the state's role of it. But fundamentally, I think that a lot of the role falls on us. You guys are obviously exceptions to the rule where you value education and political engagement highly. And not everyone has to, but if we care about telling people or giving people the message that education is important, we'll be saying it all the time. We've got to actually do things that encourage our schools and help out at working bees and be parts of the community. It falls to us at the end of the day.
So it probably leads quite nicely onto our next question as well. With someone of your background, you would be traditionally considered a Labour voter. When did you know you would vote National? Was there a particular event that sort of triggered that?
Yeah, and it's funny because I mentioned that in my maiden speech, that people will have these stereotypical ideas of what a particular ideological voter looks like or a party voter looks like. But a lot of the things that draw you to a particular party or philosophy are the things that you care about and the ideas that you have and what you think is right and wrong in the world. And it doesn't matter whether you grow up in a single household or you're a freezing worker or you're a farmer. If you believe that the role of the government is to have more engagement and more control over our lives, then you might be more left-leaning perhaps. And if you think the role is to give individuals and families more of those decisions, you might be more right-leaning. It wouldn't surprise me out there if there are plenty of business owners and farmers out there who are strongly in favour of more government intervention and more protection around those at the more vulnerable end of society and more support, say. And then there'll be those who grow up sort of in an environment like mine, where as a single parent, dad's a freezing worker, mum works at supermarkets, stereotypical working class, lower income end of the spectrum, where people would say, oh, well, you relied on welfare, you relied on the benefit, you relied on the public education system, you must be left-leaning, you must vote Labour and the Greens. But actually what I think that happened in my family was that the person that got us through and helped us out the most and taught us what was right and wrong wasn't the government or the state, and all that stuff helped, and that's why I believe in having it too. But it was mum. It was mum that sort of changed our lives and drove us to school, made sure we went to school and looked after us. And it's because she took that responsibility on herself. So that influences you and your values, and that's what means I'm probably more on the bottom right corner of the spectrum. And that's the other thing, I guess, because you've got this great podcast where you come from sort of stereotypically the left and the right, but you'll overlap much more than what you differ on. And so left and right aren't really helpful ways of describing where we all fit. I like that political compass because you're talking about influence of the government and who's got responsibility for decisions and ideas at that point.
Have you always voted National at every election?
Yes, far back as 2005, I think was my first election. Yeah, I've always voted National. That's interesting. Because I was never really political growing up, but it was always just, I had an affinity for the idea that at the end of the day I get to make my own decisions and I'm responsible for myself. So that probably drew me in younger, and I was probably slightly more almost libertarian or naive and youthful and militant when you're younger. But then you grow up and you get a bit older and you meet much more people from way different walks of life, and you realise that ideas are just ideas, and you might be wrong about some of them. So yeah, I always have.
And only if you feel comfortable answering, but was your family national voters?
I don't know. I suspect not. I've never really asked, but that's again me just guessing based on the stereotype of the environment we grew up in and what they would have sort of stereotypically voted for. I've never asked. We always went to the polling booth with Mum while she voted, but she never talked about it. We weren't a very political family. I've got great-grandparents who were farmers who I assumed probably voted National back in the day, but you never know. You never know really where people's allegiances lie.
Are they supportive of you though, being a National Party MP now?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, being an MP in general,
Yeah.
I don't think they bother too much about whether it's red or blue or left or right. But no, they definitely support me. They support what I'm doing. On some things, they're much more. This is me being lazy, but left-leaning, and some things they're much more right-leaning. So yeah, fundamentally, I think they think it's pretty cool that I'm here. I think my mum doesn't really like the attention she gets around town. I think she enjoys having a different last name to me because people don't quite connect that she's my mum. But she ends up knowing more people in Timaru than I do. I mean, she works in the supermarket and bumps into people every day. So she's basically the queen of Timaru. I think she knows that.
What's one thing you disagree with the National Party on?
One thing I disagree with them on. Well, I'll preface this with saying that because we're a broad church party, no one can belong to a political party and agree with 100% of everything that they do, right? Because otherwise it wouldn't be a very fun place to be. Look, do you mean now or in the past? It's difficult to think now because we're just coming into it.
I guess, toe the party line now.
Yeah.
It's a difficult thing, right? And Chris Luxon's found himself in that position where he's, undoubtedly defending positions that he doesn't truly believe in. So maybe to make it easier on you, a historical disagreement.
Yeah, well, it's interesting too because you can have disagreements on policy, but you hear those internally and you hear those in caucus. Yeah. And then when it comes to the public-facing side of things, you are part of a team. You've signed up to be part of the National Party and abide by their policies and their rules in the caucus. And I'm under no illusion that if I'd signed up to run for Rangitata as James Meager independent, then I wouldn't have won the seat, right? I could have campaigned as hard as I like. But people voted probably for me, partly because hopefully I'll be a good MP, but partly because I align and subscribe to the policies and philosophies and values of the National Party. Look, I think probably in the past we may have come across as being slightly too archaic in some of our justice policies, when actually underlying all that, we were the architects of social investment, we were the architects of integrated safety response teams. We've got agencies working together and putting mental health people into police call-outs. So I think we're under-recognised for the amount of what you might call socially liberal approaches to justice that we have done. So I think probably if I was to be able to encourage the party in a certain direction, it would look more about how we can invest more at the front end to stop criminals getting into the prison system. Yeah. But at the same time, I talk to victim advocates and victims all the time. And they are correct when they say that wrongdoing has a massive impact on their lives and people need to be accountable for their actions. So that's probably one example where I'd like to have some influence at some point.
I completely agree with you there, working on law myself. I think the National could definitely think a bit more about it at the stopping it from happening in the first place. Yeah. Moving on now to your maiden speech, did you expect the reaction that you got from it? No. I think it was a bit absurd at some times. I just wanted to tell people where I come from and what I've done and what I believed in. And for a lot of people that resonated. And maybe compared to some maiden speeches in the past that have been slightly more personal and discussed some things that may not have been shared in the past. So no, I didn't expect the reaction. I'm very grateful for all the kind messages. I'm glad the year is finished, 2023 is finished and 2024 is here. And now I'm just looking forward to getting onto that job of, now you've got to do the actual hard work of being in the chamber and debating legislation. And I chair a justice committee, and that is an immense privilege, but also a big workload. So I'm very happy with how the maiden speech went. I'm glad it had an impact. I'm glad people saw something from it and saw that you can come from any background and belong in any party, whether that's you want to join the Labour Party or the National Party. It doesn't matter if you've got that idea of being able to contribute and want to participate and add to the public service, then you can do that. What do you say to people who think you could be a potential leader of the party?
Well, I think that's equally absurd. Some of that's a bit nefarious, I think, sometimes. The good way to cut someone's career short is to talk about leadership and ambitions at this point.
Probably correct.
Yeah, but I think You shouldn't really, no, I shouldn't say shouldn't really. I think most people come into this place wanting to make a difference and make a change in public, right? And so the best way to do that, to pull those big levers, is to be a minister and have some influence over a ministry. So I'd love to be a minister one day. I'd love to have the privilege of serving in that capacity. I think that's a goal for a lot of people. But beyond that, no, I would want to make that contribution like that.
Cool. Changing tack slightly. So obviously the treaty and Māori are currently forefront of the media in New Zealand. Being Māori yourself, how does the current division in this country between Māori and non-Māori, and especially the rhetoric that's coming out of the coalition government, I'm not saying national specifically, the coalition government around the treaty, sort of make you feel? Did you have sort of an opinion?
I think the division between groups of people in general makes me feel very, very uncomfortable, very sad actually. I have some trouble with a lot of these, the way it's framed sometimes, and I get it, it's easier, you just describe Māori as, not you, the royal you.
Yeah.
Society describes Māori as though they are a homogenous single group, and you go, Māori think this, and the Māori worldview is on that. But that's not true. They would be like going out there and saying men think this, or women think that. I mean, just because you have certain characteristics or belong to a particular group, doesn't mean that you ascribe to the worldview that everyone else puts on that group. Because you run into difficulty, right? What happens if someone says, well, the Māori worldview is this, they have these beliefs and these ideologies and these philosophies, and I don't agree with that? Does that then mean that if I don't share that worldview, I'm no longer Māori? It can't be, right? Because with your being Māori is sort of whakapapa in how you connect and how you identify. So it's taking a step back. A lot of that conversation of things in the media about saying, look, there's a schism between government and Māori, or Māori are out on the streets and doing that, it's unhelpful, because it means that anyone who doesn't agree with whatever the protest of the day is or the issue of the day is, then is excluded or discounted from being Māori. And how can you say that to anyone? But I mean, going to the direct point about the division, I do think it's unhelpful, and I think some of that is driven by trying to put people into groups and then saying you're either in the group or you're out. So you're either, if you're in this group, you're not racist. If you don't believe in these views, you're racist. And then we've seen that happen across a lot of groups in society, and I don't think it's helpful. I think it causes more division than bringing us together. And look, we can recognise that there are disparities between individuals and families, and on a population basis, some of those are ethnic disparities. Māori and Pacific do have poorer health outcomes, poorer life outcomes. But I suspect, and I don't know if anyone's ever done this properly, if you really drill into it, the core issue there is not my DNA. It's not my whakapapa. It's not the fact that I'm Māori. I won't live any less longer than either of you two because I'm Māori. We will have the same life expectancy probably because we've come from similar economic backgrounds and situations at the time. We'll go to the doctor when we get sick. We'll probably get regular checkups. We're educated, so we're probably less concerned about going and getting help and knowing where to go. And a lot of those issues, I think, probably do stem from poverty and social inequality. And if you looked at the true drivers of health inequality, justice system, education, it essentially is poverty. And that creates a different discussion. How do you rectify that? How do you solve that? Some people might say there's more room for state intervention. Some people might say there's less and there's more responsibility on families and communities and society. But I think eventually that's where we need to get. We need to not focus on the fact that you belong to a particular group, so you get to go to this particular part of the line. I don't think I should jump a queue just because of the DNA.
Yeah, I agree with you somewhat. So do you think we need a treaty amendments bill?
Well, we're supporting it through to Select Committee, and I've got to be really careful because I am the Justice Committee Chair. So on those particular issues, I can't, and I just won't have strong views either way, because I've got to manage a committee of 11 members, and I've got to be as fair and balanced and manage the process as much as possible on that. So I don't think it's helpful for me to share my party's views or even my personal views on that. Also slightly difficult for me because I've got a constitutional law background. I was a public lawyer for 3 years. I've got an interest in constitutional law. So the discussion around the legislation that may come to the Justice Committee or not is much more complicated and nuanced than just should it be this or should it be that. I mean, you can have, there are so many different views on how you should interpret legislation, how you should interpret constitution, whether you're an originalist or a textualist or a living tree adherent. There are lots of complex constitutional jurisprudential aspects to this, and it would take a very, very long time to try and put out your views in your case without being sort of it sound bitten into 15 seconds. So I'll plead the fifth on that one, mainly under the basis that I don't think it would be fair on the justice to interpret the process, but it's a good question.
So when we're looking at social policies to help Māori who are in poverty, do you think we should be taking an equity or equality approach?
Well, it depends what you mean by both of those terms, because different people define them different ways. I just think you should, in general, you should get as granular as possible, and you should provide services to people in the way that they most identify with. So we have no problem, and in fact we encourage through whānau order, of funding organisations that provide different services in a different way to different people. So whānau order, for example, will fund whānau order providers to provide services in a way which may be more in line with tikanga Māori practices, which may reach out to different parts of different communities, but don't restrict who can access them. So people don't know this, but if you go to a whānau order provider, and this was during the vaccine rollout, you don't have to be Māori to access those services. They are provided to everyone, right? They're just provided to you in a certain way, which may mean that you get better health outcomes because you may be more comfortable going into those environments because that's your background. In the same way that you'd be more comfortable going to a rural GP in sort of a small town than maybe having to travel to Auckland and meet with a doctor who's never been out in the provincial sector, doesn't know the stresses, doesn't know what you're facing, doesn't know some of the things that you're dealing with. So I actually think there's a lot of room for nuance and detail, and actually if we had the resourcing and the time and the commitment to deal with everyone on an individual or a family basis, I think you get much better outcomes. Wouldn't it be great if we had sort of an education system where the curriculum and everyone's teaching timetable was tailored for that individual student? I know we probably can never get that because we can barely manage to keep up with classrooms of 30 and trying to provide that. But when you look at all the individuals on that level, a child learns differently from this one to this one. You've got different health needs than I do. I think you can treat it on that one, you get better outcomes.
I agree with you on the need for nuance. And do you think that's maybe one of the reasons why we've got a lot of polarisation around this topic in New Zealand, because there hasn't been a lot of nuance in the public discourse and in the media?
Yeah, it's hard to get nuance. Even if you did a half an hour or an hour long debate, it's very, very difficult to get any nuance on a particular topic back and forth. You'll see more of it if you go to select committees or if you spend time watching Parliament TV late at night with select committee of the whole stages. You'll get more of that back and forth, and you'll get more of that ideological or philosophical discussion or debate about, have we gone too far in this step, the minister hasn't thought about this, it's not a party political process, it's just the fact that this won't work. The nuance happens there. It's very difficult to get that out in public in the real world, and I think it's because the media have a tough job. They're in a competitive environment. They're on deadlines. They've got to get stories out there in a way which are digestible to people. And people have limited bandwidth. People don't have a lot of time these days to sit there and watch an hour-long program on a particular topic. Although you say that, but podcasting is very popular. So people do actually spend an hour or an hour and a half, or some people spend 3 hours watching podcasts being streamed. So there is a capacity for that debate to go out there, and I think some of the more successful podcasts do that. But general people live busy lives, and the media, and we're all trying to get summaries of topics and information to them so they can make some quick judgment calls on how they feel about it. And that might just be what we have to live with in a sort of a more free and open media environment. We don't want government to control the messages. We don't want limited competition so that one private outlet controls all the messages. It might just be how it is, and I don't know how you solve it.
Do you believe in the fact that, the right especially are pretty good at saying the media are biased, the media hate us? Do you believe in that, or do you think the media are just actually just doing their job, putting what they can out there?
I don't think the media as a system or individually are biased. I think people who work in the media, especially what you call mainstream media, probably have a slightly more let's say, pro-interventionist government leaning. At least be lazy and say left. On general, I think probably journalists have a slightly more left-leaning background or belief system, but I don't think that comes through in their reporting particularly. I think when you talk about the press gallery, what the press gallery is most interested is in holding those with power to account. Where I think the left to right leaning stuff comes in, and why I think you might have more slightly left leaning journalists, is that I think philosophically people on the left, I apologise, it's a very lazy way of thinking, but people on the left tend to think that power lies in wealth conservatism, hierarchies, business, those kind of areas. Where true power lies is in government. It's always in government. Government are the ones that can make the decisions. They're the ones that can make the rules and make you obey the rules under threat of imprisonment and basically have you down the end of the barrel of a gun. And so if the media see their job as holding those with power to account, you get a slightly more balanced view on things. But I think overall, no, look, you take the good with the bad, right? Like we sit there and we'll have bad days and we'll think we're being unfairly treated. And then the next day there'll be a story about, an opposition MP or infighting with an opposition parties. And we'll sit there and go, isn't it a great day? Isn't the media doing a great job? So I just think we need to be a little bit more reasonable about how the media do their job. They're mostly, I know a lot of them. I worked with them when I was working in government. I was a press secretary. They're good, decent people. They do their job for not a lot. They could easily go out there and get very well-paying jobs as communication specialists in government agencies or in the public sector, private sector. But they choose to be broadcasters and journalists. And they do that because I think they have a real passion for accountability and reporting and journalism. And so you've got to respect that.
I was interested when you were saying a little bit earlier, just kind of came back a bit, but on the sort of how we don't not everyone speaks with one view, especially in Māori. How do you think Te Pāti Māori are sort of playing into that? Because the sort of impression that they get put on through the media is they're the one voice for Māori and that's what all Māori think. As someone who's Māori, do you agree with anything that they say, or do you think they're sort of contributing to this bigger problem?
Bits and pieces. I think they've done a very good job of claiming that space. And part of that has to do with the interesting relationship they have with the Labour Party. So in one sense, it's very good for Te Pāti Māori to exist because it stops Labour claiming they have I use the term ownership in my speech, but traditionally Labour have basically seen those Māori seats as being their seats. And you take them for granted, right? And they basically say, well, we speak for Māori. And it's a good thing that Te Pāti Māori have come along and said, actually, there's not just one voice, we've also got a voice. The risk is they then become the one voice, and they become the de facto single Māori voice. When actually they've got a particular view on the interpretations of the treaty, on what's fair and just in terms of sovereignty and rights, what is the extent of liberal democracy. And so they've got slightly different views on that than other people have. And I think the risk is that they then become the de facto Māori voice, and it ignores all the other Māori voices across the spectrum of people who believe in things like individual freedom and sovereignty. And it is really interesting, if you really, really delve into it, this idea of sovereignty and tino rangatiratanga is not too far from a libertarian concept of it. Because all you're doing is, so someone like, and I don't speak for Te Pāti Māori, but they'll go down to the iwi and hapu level and say that's where decision making and sovereignty lies. Essentially, classical liberals just go one step further and say the best decisions are made at the individual and family level. There's not that too much disagreement. I mean, if Te Pāti Māori looked at their philosophies and ideologies very closely, they should in theory also be against an overreaching, large, paternalistic state trying to tell everyone what they should do and where they should go and what they should do with their land. There are a lot of things that government have done over the past that have been terrible for Māori and Māori land rights. The Te Tura Whenua Māori Act, which governs how Māori land can be treated and dealt with, is incredibly paternalistic. I think it says to Māori, we don't trust you to be able to deal with your own land in the way that you see fit, so we're going to put all these restrictions on what you can and can't do, who you can sell it to, how you can use it. And it means there's something like $80 billion worth of productive land tied up because the government has told them, we don't trust you to do that. I think if you got rid of things like that, there'd be much better outcomes for Māori landowners and Māori people.
Is there a particular policy while you're in, where you're an MP, either take away or implement for Māori that you would like to be able to have influence over?
I've got to be careful because there are ministers with responsibility for policies, and I am just a humble backbencher doing my job in that committee. But I think things like the Te Tura Whenua Act and making it easier for Māori landowners to deal with their land in the way that they see fit. Why do we not treat them the same way as every other property owner or every other landowner? If we're talking about equity and equality, that seems to be a big inequality. I think in particular, if you look at the justice system and the justice sector, when we're talking about my particular interest in portfolios, there are those big disparities of the number of Māori in prison. But why is that? What have we done as individuals and as families and iwi and hapu to look at what are the causes of Māori incarceration? Is it really colonisation? Well, possibly, but there are other minority groups who are underrepresented in prison stats. If it's colonisation, why are men well and truly overrepresented in the prison population? So you've got to look a little deeper into some of those stuff, and I think that stuff we talked about before about early interventions, rehabilitation, solving those early childhood problems, the dysfunction coming through in schools. I think you fix a lot of those problems, you see a lot of those ethnic and racial disparities start to disappear.
So I'll just stop you on that pause there, we've got 30 seconds left.
Oh, yeah,
I think.
cool.
So do I just stop recording and then...
Yeah, just it stops at 30 minutes.
Yeah, all good.
So what do you think the greatest challenge of our time is, James?
Okay, that's an easy question. The greatest challenge of our time is how do we operate in a world where we think there are limited resources, but where push comes to shove, we are an incredibly talented and clever and intelligent species, and when we are pushed to make more out of the resources that we have, the limited resources we have, we do it. So there's going to be a big challenge on the horizon about what does technology do to jobs and the future of work, and I know governments have tried to predict for years and years and years what impact is technology going to have on that, but there is going to be a real issue for a provincial MP about what happens when rural communities start to shrink, because as we become more productive and better at what we do, we have less need for labour and less need for there to be sort of larger families in provincial sectors. So what happens to those people? Well, they all move into towns. And so then what happens to some of the people who were reliant on manual labour jobs their whole lives, and all of a sudden automation, there's a big leap in automation and AI, and it means that those jobs now become redundant, right? So there's a huge creation of more jobs because we become more productive, we can get more value, we can do more with less, things become cheaper, so consumers are better off and they can buy more and have more wealth. But for those individuals who were once in a job where they were, say like my mum, right, working in a supermarket, maintaining shelves, doing stock taking, at some point her job may well be taken over by a robot, and checkouts, we see that all the time. Now, a lot of those jobs will be replaced by your technicians, your software operators, maintenance people literally who still have to go around and clean the checkouts themselves. But what do you do for the people who for 20, 30 years that's been their job? What's the retraining opportunities? What if you are in your 50s and 60s and you've got 10 years till you want to retire? How do you go and study for 3 years to go and be a social worker and do that? So government's got a real interesting job over the next 10, 20, 30 years of figuring out what do we do with the workforce that's going to be essentially technology out? How do we make sure they're still able to work and have a living and contribute and lead a full life? And what is government doing that gets in the way with that? So I give that example of someone having to retrain. If it's too difficult to train and enter into a profession, and you make that transition from old work to new work, then you're going to count a whole lot of people out of society and out of the workforce. And when government does that in the name of consumer protection and make it too hard to become a social worker, but actually maybe what you need for some social work or nursing or teaching is to get in and do the work and learn on the job and be able to do that. So I think there are some interesting issues there.
So is it automation or scarce resources the biggest challenge?
Well, you can't one without the other, right? Like it's both. Like there are there's conservation of energy and Newton's laws and all sorts of things. So there are limited resources when we talk about atom by atom, but we are developing new ways of harnessing the resources that we do have, right? So things like solar, hydro, wind, renewable energy systems that all come on stream. Technology will solve the limited resources problem. And the world is already on board with the fact that we need to transition away from certain resources and certain fuel types. That's why you mentioned James Shaw before. And I think one of the best things he's done is overseen strengthening of the ETS to become almost an entire system where it's a capped emission system. You operate within that. We have an emissions budget. We want to see it reduce year after year after year. Ideally for me, within that system, the businesses, individuals, people make the choices about what they use and the costs involved in that. But as long as the emissions are reducing, we shouldn't care whether it's coming from coal or coming from gas or coming from solar. The aim should be to reduce the emissions overall, and technology will get us a lot of the way.
I was intrigued when you said scarce resources initially, and that's an answer we haven't had before, because I often say in my first economics lecture, they talk about economics being the study of how we allocate scarce resources more efficiently, right? But it seems like a lot of, when we talk about economics, that we're focused on GDP or growth. How can we grow the total size of the economy and extract more resources, not necessarily how we can do things more efficiently. So I definitely appreciated that part of your answer. Just zooming out slightly, climate change will cost, the World Economic Forum says climate change will cost globally 10 to 18% of GDP by 2050, which is a GFC, an 87 stock market crash, and a COVID every year, and getting worse. So I guess my challenge to you is, how is there anything that matters more to the global economy than climate change?
Yeah, and touching your point before, the issue around the economic side of it is that you're talking about the politics of economics. The study and the theory and the practice of economics is all the underlying stuff around scarce resources. And it's when you get to the interface between politics and decision making in economics that people talk about GDP and sort of the tangible things. On climate change, I think the big challenge with climate change is that unlike a shock, a GFC, or a stock market crash, or even climate-related events, but other things like earthquakes or car accidents, things that are immediate, visual, that hit you. The big challenge with climate change is that, the best solution at the moment is to reduce the warming impact. We can do that over a 30, 40, 50-year time frame. That's essentially what the consensus around most mainstream science is. And I don't pertain to be an expert in climate science, but that appears to be what the Paris Agreement essentially says in our best interest. So when you look at something which can be solved over a 20, 30, 40-year time frame, that makes it hard for people to realise how immediately impactful and important it might be. And then, so then it makes it hard and difficult to get political buy-in and political action. But I think you're there mostly. And I think it's about continuing to gradually make that progress. Because there is those impacts and those costs of not doing anything, but there are also the impacts and costs of doing things, right? So nothing is without consequence. And some of the impacts and costs of doing things right now, and even over the next 5 or 10 years, for some people will just be unpalatable, because it is very difficult. We're sort of primitive lizard brain, monkey brain kind of animals, right? We can't see very well. That's and that is just me, right? Present company excluded.
Yeah.
But we don't see very well beyond the immediate future for ourselves. I mean, how many of us really sit there and go, oh well, if I start saving a lot more now, in 40 years' time, I'm going to have a really good retirement. Yeah. It's very, very difficult to see that. So that I think makes the social and political argument quite difficult, and answer questions like, isn't this the most urgent thing facing us now? For a lot of people, quite frankly, Finn, it isn't. For a lot of people, the most urgent thing facing them is, how do I fill up the gas tank? Or what am I going to do about my job that I don't like? Or I'm in a relationship that's broken up. That's the kind of things that affect humans as well.
Completely agree. And that same study, but from the World Economic Forum, 10 to 18% is going to cost us every year by 2050, says it'll cost us around 2% to act now, right? And the problem is that's politically unpalatable to get that 2% of GDP across the line now, which is, I guess, on you. As a young climate scientist who is across the climate science, under Labour we were looking at 4 degrees of warming, which is like the worst possible rating amongst the worst countries in the world. That's where we're tracking. Now it seems like we've unwound every single policy, and that 2% that we need to pay now to get us across the line. So, and you're right, that for people today, it's not the thing that's impacting them in the back pocket the most. It's things like inflation, cost of living, crime, etc. But 2050 is going to come around very soon, and it's going to be very soon that climate change is costing the average Kiwi far, far more than in anything that it's costing us today.
Well, I will challenge you on one point, because you said we've unravelled. I think you said every single policy, but I know you know that's not true.
Virtually everyone.
We have not made a single policy change which will affect emissions at all, because of the way the ETS is set up. Every single dollar of government investment into transitioning a border from coal to gas, or a border from coal to electric, or from buying electric cars or subsidising electric cars, every single one of those emissions is under the capped emissions budget. So all you've done is spent government money on transitioning from one to another, but not reduce the emissions, because all it's done is open up a gap in the emissions budget that other people fill, because people still pollute, and because we're allowed to pollute under the emissions budget. And then the other thing it does is it suppresses the carbon price, because it's come along and said that, well, we've made more NZUs available, so if there's more units available, the cheaper they'll become, and that's why you saw some of those options fail. partly because there were more units available, but partly because people were just sort of holding out and waiting for the government to come along and give them $100 million so that you could subsidise the companies and the corporates that were doing the pollution to do the job that the price should already be doing. So I would push back on that because, and it might just be a way that we all of us think differently about the effect and the impact of the ETS, but I think the ETS will get us there because if you set the cap and you reduce the cap, there is no legal way of emitting more because you will be fined for it. It will be unlawful.
Well, but the problem is, it's not unlawful to. You can keep emitting. You just pay the ETS price for your emissions, and
until you reach the cap. As soon as you run out of the cap, right, then you can't emit if you don't have a unit. So you've still got to buy the units within the cap, and that's what should matter. It should matter how many emissions are being released, how many units are there year by year by year, so we gradually release the cap. And if you don't have a unit to emit, then you can't emit. You just aren't allowed to do it, and that's what shuts down the highest emitting, highest cost, least productive industries. The big challenge for us when we do that is that some of those emitters, if the carbon price does go up, that will have an impact on households. So then how do you both keep a reasonable carbon price to generate that behaviour change and then also mitigate the impact of individuals and households? I just think probably we just fundamentally disagree on the effect and impact of the ETS and the policy response from the government and how much intervention the government should have in this.
I'm actually on board with you, James, in the fact that I think we could have one really blunt, simple lever, which is the ETS. And ideally for me, the true social cost of carbon is around $300 a tonne Kiwi. So that's, basic free market principle says we put a price on our externalities, it's $300 a tonne for carbon. Currently the price is only $70. I agree, one blunt measure, we probably don't need all the other policies. If we actually had an ETS price, it was $300. The problem is the cap isn't low enough and the price isn't high enough to be reducing emissions at the moment, and there haven't been indications from National of increasing the price or lowering the cap to actually reduce emissions. So without those other policies, we're not going to see the emissions.
Governments don't increase prices, right? Because the price is set by the market. So the price would be increased through the cap reduction, that's right. And one thing government could do, if you liked an interventionist government, would be to buy carbon credits and shred them. If you really truly believe that government should spend money on reducing emissions, the single fundamental and the only way to do it is to buy NZ units and shred them. Don't give them, lower the cap and do it that way. Every single time you spend $1 on an electric vehicle, all it does is it gives another dollars worth of carbon credits that can be emitted. And look, I agree, but the reason why our price doesn't quite match some of the other international prices is because we also do a lot of things to protect trade exposed industries. We still
actually a lot higher than most other countries.
We still have the ceiling. We have a floor and a ceiling, which artificially distorts the market as well. And we are still obsessed with needing to draw a circle around New Zealand and pretend that our emissions aren't global. So we don't have linked up markets with other countries. We don't say that what we care about is global emissions. And so if businesses can spend $1 billion planting trees in a part of the world which is more appropriate to plant trees, so maybe not on productive farmland, but in the middle of parts of Canada or California or Bavaria or wherever it is, and get emissions reductions there, that's actually what matters for the globe, and then actually what matters overall, because the Earth doesn't care about where the emissions come from, it just knows that they're in the atmosphere. So, but again, that's me leaning more, and us both, leaning more towards the purest model side of things. And we both recognise why that doesn't work politically, because there are trade-exposed industries. There will be consequences if we just said, yep, everyone in the ETS has to pay, gets zero free allocation. Because until we have a global system, until we have a global ETS exchange, our trade-exposed industries will be at a disadvantage. I mean, how can you sit there when other countries still subsidise some of their manufacturing sectors and subsidise agriculture, for example, and then say, not only do we not subsidise you, we're going to put a tariff or a tax on you as well. So you're going to get double hit. That has impacts, political impacts, economic impacts, social impacts, and that's why you have not a pure ETS. And I get that, but gradually over time, I think we will get there. We'll move towards it. But you make a fair point about the ETS not being perfect.
Cool. I guess we chat quite a bit to help encourage young people in politics.
Yeah.
So someone who's relatively young.
Thank you.
Do you have concerns on the impact that's going to have on your personal life?
Yeah, absolutely. And I don't feel relatively young in this room, by the way. I'm easily the oldest. I think I was doing some quick numbers in my head. Still think I am in the youngest 10-ish of Parliament.
How old are you?
36. And by the way, if anyone out there is on Wikipedia, I'm not allowed to edit my own Wikipedia page, but my Wikipedia page says 36 or 37. So my birthday is in 1987 in August. I am 36. So if anyone wants to go out there and make that correction,
Why aren't you allowed to edit your Wikipedia page?
the rules of Wikipedia, you're not allowed to edit your own page
Right.
to stop people going in and saying, James, he's awesome, he's great, he's these, he's never done anything wrong in his life. So you're not supposed to go and do that. So, I'm 36. Yes, it will have a massive impact on my life. I already know that, the amount of time you spend away from home, the impact it has on families. Look, I'm in a sense fortunate that I don't have any children. I don't have a partner, so I can set my schedule how I see fit. Although I've just taken on 2 puppies, so I've limited myself somewhat, and that gives me a really good excuse to make sure I get home as much as possible, as soon as possible. But on the flip side, it's an incredibly lonely life sometimes. You get home after a week away and the house is empty and there's no one to debrief with, there's no one to flesh things out with, there's no one to help share the load of what would be a normal sort of domestic lifestyle. And it will be difficult, and look, I want to have kids one day, I think I've been pretty open about that, and it will be difficult to meet people in and around this environment where you've got to keep yourself safe too. So one of the funny things about Parliament is it's very, very family friendly now, very dog friendly too, which is good for me. And they do a lot about talking to MPs about how to keep good relationships with your spouse and your family, and you can fly your spouse up and down once a month, twice a month, and your children, if they're under 16, get free flights. So
I know, I was supposed to be down, I was like,
and that's to keep families together and to recognise that they're away all the time. But there's nothing like that for single people. There's no, you could probably push the system and say, look, I've got a partner that I want to fly out to London for the weekend, but there's no ability for me to fly my nephews up. There's no ability for me to, you can't go out to a bar and sit in a bar and chat to people and try and meet someone. You probably could try and go on the dating apps, but again, that's fraught with danger too. And I was in a relationship for a very long time, and the whole dating app time frame passed me by. I think I don't even think they existed. I think online dating used to be really naff. I think Match.com was the only thing they used to do, and now it's the thing to do. One of our MPs met his wife on the dating apps on Tinder. So,
can you name drop them or?
well, yes, he did it in a speech yesterday. I think Carl met his wife on the app, so he talked about it in a speech yesterday. But that's just the modern way of getting to know people, and I think that'll be challenging. I think it'll be difficult. At the moment, you're so busy you don't even get time to stop and think about it. And maybe buying puppies is a pretty irresponsible thing to do. But at the end of the day, you get to get home and they come running up to you and you can lie on the ground and you can just have someone to debrief to that won't take anything to heart. So it is challenging, and if I ever figure out the answer, I'll let you know.
do you have any advice for young people who are worried about it wanting to get into politics? I know Finn here is keen to run one day.
Yeah. I don't know really. You can get in from any perspective, any angle. Do it for the right reasons. Don't do it because you think it's a great lifestyle and you want to run around in crown limos and you want to have say over people's lives. I think that's the wrong reason to get into politics. Be prepared for what the job is. You are a legislator first and foremost, so you are up in Wellington and you are in Parliament doing that legislative work, diversity committee work. But then your second job is not as a decision maker most of the time. Most of us will never get the chance to be ministers. Some of us don't even get the chance to be in governing parties, to spend all your life in opposition and then get turfed out. So be realistic that your job is to help people in your constituency and your electorate, that you'll have to deal with some pretty tough issues, and that sometimes you won't be able to help people because you'll be in opposition and you can't do anything because you don't have any ability to influence, or you'll be in government and in the backbench and you can't do anything because you've got a limited ability to influence. Or you'll be a minister and you can't do anything because it might be the right thing to do, but it's politically impossible to do. And sometimes you make those judgment calls. Sometimes you should use that political capital and do what's right, do what you think is right, and take the political consequences and risk getting kicked out of government. And possibly too many governments in the past have been afraid of that and have governed to stay in power rather than to do what's right. But if you're a young person looking to get in politics, just get involved. Not even political parties. I would recommend joining a political party. It's the best way to get a true insight as to what life's actually like and to dissuade you from becoming a politician.
It's definitely done that to me.
That's right. But politics isn't just about formal political parties. It's about getting involved in your local volunteer organisations, community groups, advocacy groups, kindergarten boards, all sorts of things, local councils. All those things have a much bigger impact on many parts of our lives than what we do here in Parliament. We have an overall sort of responsibility to create the laws of the country. At the end of the day, most of the decisions get made by you and your family and your council and community. So I'd say, if you're looking to get into politics, start there and be genuine, and don't be afraid to say what you believe in, because at the end of the day, it's a contest of ideas. And if you disagree, you put it to a vote. Sometimes you win, sometimes you lose.
So James, you're lucky enough to be on the same list as me at the start of this year, 24 people to watch. And
Oh, really?
I'm left out of that one.
Oh, you're probably on a much more
Oh
impressive
God, no.
list.
So what would you say your biggest achievement to date was prior to entering politics?
Yeah, I saw that and I had to think about it quite a while, because the whole politician job comes quite unnaturally. I'm not great at marketing myself. I don't like talking about myself. I think that's the reason why I tried to get a lot of it out early on, so that I could say to people, hey, I've pretty much told you everything that I think is interesting. There's nothing really left to learn about. I'm just interested in talking about ideas and policies now. But I think the biggest achievement was, it's kind of an odd one really, but I came from Timor South School growing up, and part of growing up, one of the hardest things growing up was getting to high school, and then everyone else got handed out the yearbook at the end of the year, and we didn't get one because we couldn't pay the donation, and because that was an extra thing, right? Or maybe I had to share a room with my brother growing up, and so living in a house when you're sharing a room with your brother growing up until you're 18 is not conducive to getting along, and it's also not conducive to a lot of other things that teenagers like to do, like hang out with friends and other things. So I set up a scholarship in honour of a former teacher of mine, Mel Beach, who's since passed away, and it's a very modest scholarship, right? But it's to go towards leavers of Timaru South School, and it's a small financial contribution to their high school, right? To be put on account of their high school, so it can pay for things like stationery costs, uniform costs, if they want to take up extracurricular activities, sports fees, yearbook costs, anything like that. Whatever the family want to spend it on, it's up to them, because I don't believe in too much control over that. And I think that's probably one of the proudest things I've ever done. It's a small thing, but it really reflects where I came from and what I think you can do as an individual to help people in your community. And I'm very proud of that, and that is actually probably one of the best things I've done. And now you've got, I've had 4 kids from Timaru South School go through. Very tragically, the first recipient was a boy called Dakota Cross, and he passed away in his year 10. He had an illness, and so I'm trying to think about what we can do to honour that and to reflect him, because the contribution for me continues on through their schooling and training for the 5 years. So if one of the recipients decides to leave school in year 11, this shows my age, 5th form, and go to a trades training course, $250 or whatever it is, go towards that instead. So that's probably the proudest thing I've done.
Wow, that's awesome.
Beautiful. Yeah. Thanks so much for your time, James.
No
really
problem.
appreciate having you on the podcast.
All right.